the time is going to pass anyways. And I feel like people always forget that, right? They get so excited about this new business concept. And I tell them, I promise you, your future self, whether it be a year from now or 6 months from now, it will absolutely thank you if you take the time and take slow baby steps towards opening a physical space. Because the last thing that I want to see is people to dive in head first, realize they hate it, realize that it's just not a proper fit for them. And now all of a sudden have to go through all those really difficult, financially devastating steps that a lot of people face when that happens. So it's always better to take your time and start slow and small than to kind of dive in head first, if that makes sense.
Hi, Michele. Welcome to the Teacher Biz podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm excited for this conversation too. Your business is so interesting, and I'm excited for my listeners to hear about it. So let's start. If you could tell me a little bit about what you were doing before you had a business, and then tell us what your business looks like now.
Yeah, so I actually started out in the corporate world. So I had a 9 to 5 desk job in the marketing world. I actually worked for Wegmans Food Markets, which if anyone is on the East Coast, they'll know exactly what Wegmans is. But I did marketing and social media for them. And when I had my first child was really when I, realized, okay, I can't be doing this anymore. I had a 90-minute commute each way into work, and I was just kind of looking for my next move. I knew I wanted to open a business. I knew I wanted to do something that was, not keeping me trapped at a desk. I wanted to spend more time at home with my new son and my family, but I didn't really know what that might look like. And then it actually kind of happened by chance. So my husband was traveling a lot for work at the time while I was on maternity leave, and we were going to all these bigger cities. So we happened to go to Chicago. And my son and I were looking for something to do, even though he was just a couple months old at the time. We were just kind of looking for somewhere to go that I knew would be very accepting of, a new mom and an infant. I didn't want, everyone to stare at us when we walked into a silent coffee shop kind of thing. So we happened to stumble upon the concept of a play cafe, which in essence is just what it sounds like, right? It's an indoor playground combined with a coffee shop. And I had never heard of that before because we didn't have any in my local area. And I just got hit with that inspiration that, this is something that I feel like I could do. And we'll kind of talk later about how that, belief was a little bit misguided. And I jumped a little bit too quickly into that endeavor. But once I visited that space, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. And even before I went to my corporate marketing job, I actually went to business school. So I have a master's in economics. So I felt like that combined with, everything I had learned in those whole 2 months of motherhood, I thought I was, very well equipped to have success in the brick and mortar world, which again was a little bit misguided. I maybe was a little bit smug and didn't do as much preparation steps or as many preparation steps as I probably should have and could have. But I ended up opening my indoor playground just a few short months later, and I operated it for almost 6 years before selling our locations. We actually ended up opening 2 different locations in our local area. We were really the first to market with that concept. And now I've since moved away since we sold our locations. And now when I go back and visit, it's so funny. There's like 12 different indoor playgrounds, and there's so many options, which is amazing. But it was very new and novel when we had first opened. And something that I really noticed when I was first getting started and when I was doing that preparation and planning, I noticed that there wasn't a lot of information out there about the indoor playground play cafe concept. And all of the current owners that I had reached out to, I went on Instagram, I went on Facebook, I sent a bunch of emails, I, set up some, interviews, I paid for a lot of consulting calls, but something that I noticed is that nobody was really willing to share their secrets. And I think that really, it put me at a huge disadvantage because while I had, the textbook business knowledge and while I had the corporate marketing knowledge and while I was a mother myself, I really felt grossly underprepared for all of the roadblocks and obstacles and things that came up, especially in that first year of business. And, I kind of said to myself, luckily I did figure it out and we did end up becoming very profitable. But, once we hit that turning point, I thought, gosh, I really never want another business owner in this industry to feel this way again. And that kind of brings us to present day. Now, since I've sold my locations, I've kind of dedicated myself full time to creating content that does exactly that. That helps lift the veil a little bit on this industry and shares tips and strategies and what works and what doesn't work. And something that I really pride myself on is my honesty. I never sugarcoat how difficult this industry can be. I never, gloss over the pitfalls and the risks and the downsides and things like that. But that's what I do today. I have a course called Play Cafe Academy. And that's really what I say to get people from daydream to opening day, meaning, they're kind of that new parent, or maybe they're a current teacher or working at a corporate desk job. And they're thinking, there has to be a business where I can involve my family. It kind of takes them from that, having that little entrepreneurial bug all the way through to opening day. And it really, again, leaves no stone unturned, so to speak, when it comes to those preparation steps, because there's not a lot of information out there. And I just feel so thankful that, I'm able to do this full time now.
Wow. So that is just really cool. I love that you're sharing what you learned along the way. The idea of a play cafe as a mom of two little kids myself is awesome. We don't have any here. So if anyone wants to open one in Connecticut, I would love to come to it with my kids. We don't have any, and it sounds amazing to have a place. I mean, there's lots of places to bring the kids that are just for the kids, but not for the grown up too. So I love that. I love how you took something that you found out in the world and then made it your own. And I want to hear more about kind of this journey, those things you were hinting at about the struggles of opening a brick and mortar business, which is something we haven't really talked a lot about here on the show. I'm always pushing that online business thing. Um, so it will be interesting for listeners to hear about the brick and mortar things that come into play when you have a physical business. And then I would love to hear how that kind of compares to the business that you have now and maybe some of the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, absolutely. And those questions kind of tie together in the brick and mortar world. And something that I always say, because again, something that I really pride myself on is never sugarcoating how difficult this industry can be, whether it's talking about entering the industry as a new business owner, or whether it be, continuing to operate and maybe expand a couple years down the road. But something that is a lot different about the brick and mortar industry and about the play cafe industry specifically, something I always say is that it is unrelentless and it is unforgiving. And what I mean by that, let's start with unforgiving. Unfortunately, many of those decisions that you make in the very beginning process, so how you acquire your funding, what investors you involve, or maybe a business partner, what lease you end up signing, what location you choose, what your business name is, the play structures that you purchase, a lot of those decisions are more or less permanent, right? They're very difficult and very costly to change. Whereas with an online business, it's very easy to pivot. So, for example, if you don't like your website today, you can hire someone and realistically have a brand new website, a brand new brand, a brand new business, really, in just a short couple of weeks. And it really isn't that cost prohibitive to make those big pivots and those big changes. But with a brick and mortar business, let's talk about a lease. You're signing, basically, I don't want to say your life away, but for the next 5 to 10 years, because that's typically the length that we see for many commercial leases, that signature has real consequences. And I have an entire YouTube video about, all of the different scenarios that can come when you break a lease, if the worst case scenario does happen. But spoiler alert, none of them are fun and none of them are pretty. So if, you're a couple months into operation and you decide, gosh, I'm really overpaying for rent. I wish I had gone off the beaten path a little bit and not paid for this prime real estate, prime location on this main road, or, gosh, this space just really isn't big enough for us, or maybe it's too big and we're underutilizing it. You can't just say, you know what, I'm going to walk away from this and I'm going to start from scratch in a new space, right? That's just not realistic. So unfortunately, that's one of the big reasons why I felt such a need and why I felt so called to really walk people through that beginning process, because there are very high stakes and there are real consequences for making the wrong decisions. And again, another spoiler alert, a lot of what I talk about in my courses is because I made a lot of those very expensive mistakes that I wasn't able to reverse. I was really only able to reconcile a lot of those mistakes with our second location. And I think a lot of, the inspiration behind that second location was I just wanted to test if it really did make that big of a difference. If you work with a forgiving landlord as opposed to one that is just, not willing to work with your business or not willing to negotiate, things like that. I really wanted to test out some of my theories. And again, I never want another business owner in this industry to make the same mistakes I did because, again, it's not easy to change. And when I say unrelentless, it means that, you can't just put pause on a lot of the bills for a brick and mortar business. Like looking at my online business now, for example, I use Kajabi to host my website and my courses. And Kajabi, along with many other software providers, if you decide that, I'm having a health struggle or I'm going to be moving or, you have some big life event because we never know when those big life events are going to happen. A lot of these tools and softwares, they give you an option to pause, right? You can pay, I don't know, $50 a month or something pretty affordable to quote unquote park your business. And you're not going to incur these huge expenses while you're not able to actually operate your business or move it forward or see that new cash flow. Whereas with a brick and mortar business, regardless of whether or not you're using that physical space, you're still going to have to pay rent on it. You're still going to have to pay utilities. If, nobody walks through that door, you're still going to have to pay that staff member that you hired to work there, even if they're not actually generating revenue while they're there. So it's unforgiving in that a lot of the early decisions you make, especially, are permanent, and it's unrelenting, I guess, is a good word for it, because you can't press pause on any of the bills, whether you have a life event or not, whether you get pregnant with another baby, which is also something that I dealt with within my first year of opening, or, really anything unexpected happens. You can't just put a pin in it. You can't just press pause. And I think that's where a lot of people end up struggling. And luckily, there's an option, to sell your business. You can sublease. There's a lot of different options, but again, none of them are easy. None of them are things that you want to have to go through when you're going through a health crisis or when you're pregnant and very sick like I was. So again, when people are considering an online business versus a brick and mortar business, those are some things that they really have to consider and think hard about. And for a lot of my clients, it really comes down to how strong their support system is. So for example, I didn't have really any support system locally, and that made it very difficult for me. So when I physically couldn't go to my business and work because I was extremely sick in my first couple of months of pregnancy, plus I had, a son that was less than a year old as well at that time, I didn't really have, a parent that I could call because they were living hours away at the time. I didn't have a lot of friends because we were brand new to the area. So when people are kind of at that crossroads and they're saying, I really want to create this business, I really feel, that itch to open a brick and mortar or a physical business, one of the first steps is something that a lot of people might not think about, and that's establishing a strong local support system, whether that's the family that you were born into, or whether that's neighbors, or whether that's connecting with local parent groups, anyone that can kind of step in, whether you need help personally in your personal life, or whether you need help in your business, especially if you're brand new in an area like I did. I think I really struggled in so many places because, again, I didn't have that support network. So, with an online business, you don't necessarily need that, but it's always something that I like to mention when people are kind of, again, toying between the two different options.
I love that. It feels like whole life advice versus like those specific business strategies, and it makes so much sense. What do you think about the cost of running a physical business versus the cost of running an online business? And I'll say I'm always teaching my students to start an online business. And I talk to them about the investment. I actually have an episode of the podcast about startup costs to opening your online business. But I think you could be so scrappy online in the beginning and really start with, a few $100, definitely $1,000 for your first year in business, which is so low compared to having a physical business. So can you talk about that for just a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually just hosted a free class all about estimating your startup costs and getting the funding that you need for your brick and mortar business, because as you said, it's a much bigger upfront cost. And that's where a lot of people get kind of hung up, and that's where a lot of people struggle. And that's true. A lot of people assume with a brick and mortar business that it's very similar to an online business because 99% of the podcasts, YouTube videos, business books out there, they're giving advice for, general business owners. But really, when you dig into it, it's really more geared towards online businesses, right? So a lot of us who are looking to open a brick and mortar business, we're hearing start scrappy, start small, you can always get bigger, you can always grow. And they hear that and they automatically assume I can employ that same strategy in my brick and mortar business. And while there are some exceptions, which I'll talk about in a minute, that's not always necessarily true, unfortunately. Because what I'll see a lot of people do is, they'll start small and they'll rent a room. They won't do any build out. They'll spend very little on the actual construction of their space. They'll, buy a bunch of toys on Amazon and essentially just fill the room with toys. And they think, oh, in a couple months when I have the money, I'll purchase that play structure. Or in a couple months, I'll add a coffee bar. Or in a couple months, I'll paint and I'll renovate and things like that. And the big, and I hate to say this, but unfortunately, once people come to your business, especially a brick and mortar physical business, once you get them in the door and they have a really negative experience or they feel like they weren't able to get the value that they were expecting from that experience, right? If somebody walks into your business and thinks, gosh, I have all these toys in my living room, or, it literally looks like they just rented a storage unit and filled it with toys, I feel like I didn't really get what I was expecting. And, when I'm bringing my kids out into the world, right, there's so much that goes into it as a parent. You got to pack a diaper bag, you got to plan the nap schedules. Like it is a whole production. So to give a parent that negative first experiment, even if you do end up improving and adding things down the road and, making these exciting little updates, it's going to be much more difficult to get somebody back into your space for the second time, just for open play, right? For a very low ticket item, let alone trust you enough to book a birthday party at your space, right? Because those are milestone moments. Those are very, special to a family. So while there are options to kind of start small, I really don't want people to assume that, again, they can go small with the actual physical build out of their space. Now, there are some situations where I will see people start small and add things later, but it's a little bit different, right? So a great example of this would be, I'm going to open and I'm going to do a very basic coffee menu. I'm just going to do coffee and espresso. I'm not going to dive into iced or blended drinks or teas or anything like that. I am going to have a cafe, but I'm going to start very basic. And that's what a lot of people do. And it's very easy to kind of get your customers excited about new menu items and things like that. But if you start without having a cafe, for example, and then add one later, it's very hard to retrain your customers to think of you as a place that offers coffee or as a place where they can expect that hot cup of coffee that they can enjoy while their kids play, right? Because they're used to having to stop at the drive-through before they come. And who knows, maybe that's preventing them from actually coming to your space. So again, there are some ways to start small, but I really want to encourage people to not dive into actually planning a physical space until you're ready to make that big investment. And as I said, there are very creative ways to get funding. There's a lot of government money available. There's a lot of ways to combine multiple funding avenues to get your total startup cost to really bring your true business vision to life. Because that's what I see so much, unfortunately, in this industry is people will start out, with their Pinterest board, their dream business, and then they'll cut corner after corner and expense after expense. And then they'll end up so far from their original business just to save a little bit of money or just because they didn't want to spend the time saving money to really bring their dream business to fruition. And then they realize like, oh, not only is the physical space not aligned with what I had envisioned, but that means the actual business and the impact that I'm able to make is no longer aligned. So they start resenting their business and they start looking for an out. And that really draws from their creative energy. And it's just not a place that you want to operate a business from, right? Especially a creative business like one that involves kids and families. So having said all that, there are plenty of ways to start small that don't involve skimping on your physical space. So for example, what I'll see a lot of people do who think they might want to open an indoor playground, but maybe they don't have the funding or maybe they're working a day job. So a lot of these people who do this are teachers, for example. But again, maybe they don't have the money, maybe they have a day job, or maybe they just aren't sure if it's something that they want to sign their next 5 years of their life away to. A lot of times they'll do what I would call, basically a minimum viable product for the indoor play industry. So that might look like a soft play rental company. So essentially you buy stock of soft play rental equipment and then you can rent it out for birthday parties. So is it going to be exactly the same as running a brick and mortar business? No. But you are going to start working with parents and families. You're going to start learning what it takes to book a birthday party. You're going to start learning about what parents are looking for when it comes to play and birthday parties. You're going to start forming really important relationships in your community. You're going to start learning what works and what doesn't work in terms of marketing, right? Even though it's not a direct comparison with this minimum viable product, you are going to gain so much experience and so much insight into if this is even something that you want to pursue. A lot of times people will do, maybe a soft play rental business or maybe a balloon art business, right? Something that is indoor playground adjacent, but is a little bit less costly to start up, a little bit less long-term of a commitment. And they'll say, you know what? I actually really don't like working with kids' birthday parties, or gosh, I've had all these nightmare parents that I worked with. I think I'm going to pivot. I think I'm going to do an online business, or gosh, I decided I wanted to expand my family and this isn't the time to sign a lease, right? So when somebody comes to me and again, they're not quite ready to quit their job or they don't have a lot in savings, they don't have, the time to really commit to working on some of the funding options that I give in that free class that I mentioned, I say, you know what? Learn a skill that you can easily learn on YouTube, like balloon twisting or creating balloon arches or something like that. You can get that type of business started with just a few $100s. And you can just, again, dip your toe in to see how it feels to operate in an indoor playground adjacent industry. And like I said, so many of those people decide, you know what? This isn't for me. Or on the flip side, they absolutely love it. And now all of a sudden they're able to generate this revenue, they're able to grow their business, and they have now all of this experience, all of this know-how, all of this marketing. They have social media channels, they have all of these relationships that they form, they have a customer list that really helps them build a successful launch for an eventual play space. So I really don't see any downside in that because, scenario number one, you learn the lessons that you need to and you figure out this isn't the industry that I want to be in without having to sign a lease or without having to go through any of that messy closing or selling situation, or you love it and you make a lot of money and that ends up funding your physical space. So to me, there's really no downside in that. And the one objection that I hear constantly when I tell people this is, well, it's going to take forever, or it's going to take too long to figure out this way, but the time is going to pass anyways. And I feel like people always forget that, right? They get so excited about this new business concept. And I tell them, I promise you, your future self, whether it be a year from now or 6 months from now, it will absolutely thank you if you take the time and take slow baby steps towards opening a physical space. Because the last thing that I want to see is people to dive in head first, realize they hate it, realize that it's just not a proper fit for them, and now all of a sudden have to go through all those really difficult, financially devastating steps that a lot of people face when that happens. So it's always better to take your time and start slow and small than to kind of dive in head first, if that makes sense.
Such good advice. I love all of those ideas for starting small and kind of dipping their toe in the waters. I also love how you've taken what you learned from diving in headfirst and now you're teaching that to others so that they can kind of learn from your experience and have that shortcut. I feel similar in a way because before I had my successful teacher biz, Kindergarten Ready, I had this blog. It was still an online business that I didn't even consider a business, but it was 4 years of hardly making any money. But in that time, I learned so many things that I now teach my students not to do. And I think that's kind of the point of these lessons that we learn in business that, from things that don't really go the way that we want them to, but good comes out of it in a way when we do teach other people not to do those things. So I love that you're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my favorite quotes that I have to remind myself of all the time is that the road to success is paved with mistakes that were handled well. So I always tell people in my membership, I have a coaching call actually with my indoor playground group right after this. And a lot of people will come to it and say, gosh, I did this event and it didn't work out. Or gosh, I put my summer camp information out there and nobody's booked yet. And they come really discouraged. But I really like to encourage people to get excited when something doesn't land right, or when they make a mistake, or when they mess up, because it gives us so much information on how to move forward. And that's one thing working with so many teachers, because a lot of teachers end up wanting to open indoor playground businesses. That's usually something that they need a little bit of help with, right? They're really good at that creative aspect of the business. They're great at coming up with classes and coming up with event ideas and designing a really engaging play area. But when it comes to the actual numbers and the financial side and profit margin and costs and things like that, they just, kind of want to ignore it. And they just are 100% concentrated on putting together the class that the kids are going to have the most fun at. And that's another reason why I created my programs, is because it really, gives people a very easy and practical way to figure out, okay, yes, this event is going to be really fun and the kids are going to laugh, and oh gosh, they're really going to love this craft that they do, and the parents are going to be able to, display it in their home. But, you know, here's this calculator to figure out if this is actually sustainable for your business, or here's a line that you need to draw in the sand of when it comes to, is this going to be actually profitable? Is it not going to be profitable? And if it doesn't work, here is literally a list of items or a list of numbers that you need to check to figure out, okay, where exactly did it fail? Right? Because it probably didn't fail in the actual event itself, because that's what teachers are great at. They're great at designing really engaging curriculums and schedules for kids. But, again, a lot of times teachers just don't really have the background or experience or education to figure out, okay, this didn't work as well as I thought it would. How can I figure out how to do it better next time? And that's exactly what I give to teachers is, here's your calculator. Here's how to plug in all your expenses. Here's how to figure out how to price your events to actually make money and things like that. Because again, that is where teachers struggle. And I kind of had the opposite experience, right? Because I went to business school. So I'm very good at the numbers and the financial reporting and things like that. What I'm not good at is creating creative classes and events and things like that. And that's why I created my program, because very quickly I figured out that, oh, I'm the outlier in this industry, right? I'm one of the only people who enter this business with a business background. Usually it's a teaching background. And I just kind of find this opportunity to kind of marry our two skill sets. And, they give me tons of creative ideas. Obviously I already sold my space, but when I was still operating my space and kind of doing the online business and the brick and mortar business at the same time, they would give me all of the creative ideas, and I would get to look to them to figure out, okay, what are the cool summer camp themes this year? Or, what are the 5-year-old girls into? Things like that, because that's really where I lack.
I love that. So much good stuff in there. I think you're so right. It's very unique to be in this online business space with an actual business background. You are the first person I've talked to that has a business background. So many of us come in from the creative side, and I love that you're bringing the balance of the business part of it, which is, of course, so important. You've talked a lot about how you have so many teachers in your audience. You told me that you have an audience of mostly teachers accidentally. So can you share with us a little bit about why you think that is and why teachers are so drawn to this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very similar to the reason that a lot of people go into teaching. It's because they want to make a profoundly positive impact on the lives of kids and families. And I found that when teachers, are looking to transition from a traditional teaching role to a physical brick and mortar play space, a lot of times they're looking to make that impact just in a different way, right? The beautiful thing about an indoor playground is that the stakes aren't quite as high as in a school environment, right? You don't have to give grades. You don't have to get kids up to certain scores. You don't have to deal with, you're going to have to deal with parents, but it's again in a much lower stakes environment than it would be in a school environment. You don't have to answer to management or admin or anything like that. And while I'm not a teacher myself, both my sister and brothers are teachers, so I do have a little bit of experience in that regard, and how challenging it can be to want to make a difference in the lives of kids, but being told, oh, that's not the right way, or oh, you can't do that, or something like that. So what I love about the indoor playground business is it gives a lot of teachers the kind of a way to access that impact in their own way, in their own unique way, where they don't have to abide by those standards or anything like that that are kind of dictated to them by management or by the state or whatever the case may be. Now, where I see a lot of teachers come into trouble in this industry is that, they go into it because they love kids, they want to make an impact. But again, and this is just my experience in speaking with many, many teachers, I think I did a survey actually leading up to this episode, and I think over 90% of my community are former teachers, people that are actually operating these indoor playground industries, not just people who are, on the fence, people who are actually actively operating these. And I always ask them, what is something that shocked you? And time again, I always get the answer that, they really didn't realize what they would actually be spending their time on in the indoor playground industry. So again, a lot of people who are teachers, they thought, oh, this is going to be so fun because I get to spend all day with kids and that's what my day-to-day is going to look like. And it's going to be kind of like teaching, but again, lower stakes, right? Win-win. Everybody's happy. But unfortunately, I would say 0.01% of your time as an indoor playground owner, unfortunately, is going to be actually spent interacting with kids. The other time is going to be spent creating financial reports, talking to your coffee supplier and figuring out your order, mopping the floor, changing bathroom supplies, marketing. And one of the biggest, I guess, points of underestimation from the teacher community is how much time you have to spend hiring, training, and managing a team. That's always a big standout component when I talk to teachers, because a lot of times they're used to managing their classrooms and they're used to getting direction from admin, but they're not really used to managing adults as a team. And that's an area where they really struggle. And that's actually, I spent pretty much all of 2023 completely redoing my programs from scratch because I felt like that was an area where I found that people were just consistently struggling in and were spending, upwards of 80% of their time just hiring, training, and managing. Because in the brick and mortar retail business, there's a lot of turnover. It's very difficult to find good people and keep them engaged and make sure that everything is getting executed the way that you want. Because when you're the teacher, right, you're kind of like the king of the classroom, right? You have a lot of control. Somewhat. You have a lot of control over how things get implemented and things like that. But when you're a brick and mortar business owner, there are so many other things that you don't have to deal with, or that you do have to deal with, that you didn't have to deal with as a teacher, like paying the electric bill, like, making sure that all of those bathroom supplies get changed, whether it's you physically doing it yourself, which a lot of owners find themselves doing, or whether that's delegating that and outsourcing that, right? So there's all of these things that go into making an indoor playground run that teachers just don't think about because they're solely focused on creating that positive impact. And again, that's a big reason why I created my YouTube channel, why I have my podcast, is because I don't want teachers to lose that spark. I want them to spend as much time and energy as possible being creative, doing what they wanted to, what they set out to do when they came into this industry. I try to take all of those business decisions and creating standard operating procedures and coming up with legal contracts and waivers and all that financial reporting. I try to take all of that off of their plate so that they can spend as much time as possible coming up with fun classes and spending it with the kids and being able to delegate as much of those, boring tasks as possible so that they can do what they love. But it doesn't come naturally. And again, that's the biggest misconception that I think teachers have about this industry, is that they're going to be spending a lot of time with kids. But not only are they going to be spending so much time doing the behind the scenes admin tasks, they're going to be spending almost all of their time interacting with the parents, which as a teacher is probably something that you don't want to hear, right? Yes, the stakes are a little bit lower, but you're still, you still have to deal with people on their milestone moments, right? So I used to actually be a wedding planner. That was my first entrepreneurial experience. And dealing with somebody on the quote unquote most important day of their lives, which is what a lot of brides think when they're leading up to getting married, it was so stressful that I just completely pivoted. I could not do it. I went back to my 9 to 5. I was like, this is just too much pressure. And while, a birthday party isn't quite that monumental moment, right? It's not as important as a wedding day. I swear to you, people really do think a lot of times that their kid's first birthday party is like a make or break moment in their life. And that's something that I personally really underestimated, especially because my son was just a couple months old, right? I didn't understand that some cultures really do put such an emphasis on first or second birthday parties. And there are these huge events and everything has to be perfect and things like that. So again, a lot of teachers go into this business thinking that they're going to be playing with kids, and you can make it that if you set up your business the right way from the start, but just be prepared to, again, spend way more time than you think managing your team, doing admin tasks, and unfortunately, interacting quite a bit with the parents and dealing with those yucky customers and bad reviews and negative feedback and all that unfortunate stuff that comes with, a brick and mortar public facing business.
Hearing you talk about this makes me feel really confirmed in my decision to have an online business instead of a physical one, because there is just so much that goes into that I feel grateful at this moment that I don't have to deal with.
One thing that I always tell people is that when, again, especially when they're just considering, should I go an online business? Should I create a brick and mortar business? You know, when I am really having like a heart to heart with somebody, I do a lot of one-on-one consulting, and I do this quite a bit. And I say, okay, you know, yes, running an indoor playground is not an easy way to make money. There are plenty of easier ways to make money, right? You could be a virtual assistant, you could do marketing, you could do all of these things. You could, create a soft play rental company, you could be a balloon artist. And yes, those things are going to be a lot easier. They're going to be a lot less risky. But here's the downside with that. There really is no other business quite like running a brick and mortar indoor playground in terms of the profound positive impact that you can have on your community. So yes, there are easier ways to make money, but the impact, not just on your community, but on your own family is just so significant. So for me, even though, now my online business makes a lot more in terms of profit than my brick and mortar business, because as you said, the costs are much lower. Even though it makes less money, I don't get to involve my kids as much. Like there is really nothing that can replace working with my kids behind the counter, teaching them how to use a cash register, showing them, okay, this is how you stock a shelf. This is how you place an order. This is, and I used to be able to physically involve them in every single task in my business. And I actually recently just had a podcast guest on, you might know her, Jamie Trill, and she actually taught us how we can hire our kids as young as, toddlers, preschoolers, elementary aged kids, and really involve them in the business. And my son now is 9, so he was just a tiny infant when we first opened. And even to this day, he still applies so many of the lessons that he was able to learn, even though he was under 5 years old during most of my business ownership, my physical location business ownership. He still remembers that and he still carries it with him. And it also taught him, like, hey, I can do this too. Look at all of these amazing things that my mom did. And there's just really no, there's nothing better than being able to actually touch something that you created and physically be there. And we got to have, I think between my two sons, we had 9 birthday parties for our own family in the facility. And we have thousands and thousands of professional pictures that we had taken. And I'm so grateful that he was able to physically be there in my business. And yes, he still helps me with some YouTube video editing and things like that. But again, the impact that a physical business location can have on your local community and in your own family unit is just irreplaceable. So yes, there is a lot of risk and a lot of downsides, but there also is a huge, massive upside that I don't want people to forget.
Thank you for bringing balance to the conversation there. I think that is important for people to hear. And so beautiful that you got to do that with your kids and teach them those lessons about running a business. I love that. Are there any mistakes that you have seen teachers make as they're transitioning into building out their business? I know you already touched on a few in not understanding the expense and things like that, but anything else that comes to mind there?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, if your strength is really the creative side of the business and choosing play structures and things like that, let that be what you spend most of your time on. And don't be afraid to hire or ask for help in order to fill in those gaps. And it doesn't have to be me, right? I'm just one person. I would hire a local accountant if you're not comfortable setting up the numbers. I would hire a local real estate attorney if you've never looked at a lease before and you want to make sure you're protected. Do not be afraid to ask for help and hire outside expertise when you're making those big decisions, especially the big decisions that, like I said, are not really reversible, like choosing your location, signing your lease, purchasing those big play structures. Make sure you ask for help and do your due diligence. And again, even if it's not my community, or even if you're opening, another type of brick and mortar business, maybe a restaurant or something like that, learn from people who went before you. So again, it doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be, necessarily the biggest person in your industry, the one that comes up first when you Google it, but reach out to people who have similar businesses to the ones that you envision. So if there's somebody, even if it's across the country, that are doing what you envision yourself doing, reach out to them. Offer to pay for their expertise, right? A lot of people will, send the "can I pick your brain" DM, which often gets ghosted and ignored. So what I would love to tell people is don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to hire, and don't skimp on it either. Because again, a lot of those decisions that you make are really going to be huge determinations when it comes to whether or not your business is actually going to be successful. And 10 times out of 10, when I talk to indoor playground owners that are maybe coming to me several years down the line and they're struggling, 10 times out of 10, they wish they had gone back and learned from people who had went before them. They wish that they had spent more money on experts from the beginning. They wish they would have, hired that consultant or done that course before they made those big decisions. And, again, I went into this business a little smug. I thought that I knew everything. I thought that I, had everything that it took because, again, even though I didn't own an indoor playground before, I was a mom and I had owned other businesses in the past. So I thought I knew it all. But every industry has its nuances, whether it's online business or whether it's a brick and mortar business. So don't underestimate those nuances. Don't, go into this with a know-it-all mindset. Be open to learning new things. Be open to hearing other perspectives and other experiences. And don't be afraid to be seen trying something new. Don't be afraid to ask for help because you're going to be seen as less than, or you think you should know it all because you're a teacher. I promise you, anybody that you reach out to who you deem to be super successful, they were in your shoes once. And, of course, if you offer to pay them for their time and expertise, you're going to get a much warmer response. But oftentimes, most times, they will be willing to share their experience and help you avoid those mistakes if they're in the business for the right reasons. And most of the time, one of the things I love most about the indoor play industry is that people do go into this business for the right reasons, right? They want to create a positive impact. So don't be afraid to reach out to people who, again, are doing the things that you want to do, and don't be afraid to invest in that course, in that expert, in that person who, again, is doing the things that you want to do.
Such good advice. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really good for people to hear when they're making these big decisions. And I really appreciate that. What do you think is maybe one of the biggest lessons that you've learned, either in starting your business or in transitioning to now having your online version of your business? I'd like to hear that.
Yeah, so I mean, I've touched on this a couple of times, but something that I wish I could go back and tell myself when I first got started, and again, this doesn't apply to like a physical brick and mortar space, but just in business in general, I wish I would have given myself a little more grace to just put stuff out there before it was finished, right? Do that Facebook Live, even if my makeup isn't done, even if I don't feel completely scripted or prepared, reach out to people in my community, figure out what they're looking for, what they're needing. Don't be afraid to put something out there just because it doesn't feel perfect. And, I always tell people, like, put it out there before it's done because you're going to be able to refine and perfect later down the road. And that's okay. And this kind of more applies to my online business. And that's one of the things I love about online business versus a brick and mortar business. I can, quick throw up a PDF and be like, you know what? Yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time designing this. I want to see how my audience reacts to it first. And if it's a winner, then I'm going to go back and spend the time. So anybody that is just getting started, I work with a lot of course creators, and I always hear, oh, well, this isn't perfect, or I'm going to launch this in 3 months. Launch it today. Literally launch it today. Don't be afraid to fail fast. Don't be afraid to put something out there and then take it back and say, you know what, this needs to be replumbed. Don't be afraid to put stuff out there before it's finished. Something that really stuck with me, and I'll never forget this. One of the biggest people in my industry back when I was, doing the marketing thing, because one of my online business forms was doing marketing for other course creators. One of the biggest, I guess, experts in our industry, her name is Rachel Peterson. She's, a social media person. And I'll never forget, I saw her on stage at an event and I just had her in my mind as like the most successful person who was doing what I wanted to do. And I'll never forget it. I stumbled upon one of her ads. It was for like a business bundle for like course creators, or, a bundle of social media tips. And I was like, I want that. So I entered in my email address. I got it. And it was literally 5 PDFs with a couple bullet points each, no graphic design, no, production value. It was hosted in a Google Drive folder. But the tips were great. And I just remember thinking like, gosh, I got so much value out of this. But, she clearly just threw this up there because she wanted to help people. She knew those tips were going to make an impact. And that just really stuck with me. And ever since I downloaded that very simple thing, I've never let perfectionism hold me back from making an impact in my community or providing value. So when I do a podcast episode and I want to give, a list of tips or something like that, I don't, say, oh gosh, I have to hire a graphic designer now and it's going to be a 2-week turnaround. I just put it in a PDF. I put it in a Google Doc sometimes. I'll be like, hey, here's the link. And I'm telling you, people appreciate that so much more than they appreciate pretty colors or pretty graphics or something like that. So don't let perfectionism hold you back. And also, and this is again especially true of me transitioning from a brick and mortar owner to an online, I guess, coach or consultant, don't feel like you have to be perfect or without flaws to positively impact others, to help other people. Was I the most profitable indoor playground in the country? No. Did I have the best space? No. Were there plenty of other people, operating indoor playgrounds that were bigger, better, more profitable than mine? Absolutely. However, they weren't sharing any tips. They weren't sharing their failures. So I knew that even though I wasn't the best, the most perfect out there, I knew that there was still value in my experience. Even if I made 100 mistakes, if I was willing to share not only how and why I made those mistakes and what they were, but most importantly, how I recovered and how I pivoted from them and how I learned from them and how I would go back and change that, initial decision or whatever the case may be. There's true value in that. And sometimes there's almost more value in teaching, lifting the veil on your mistakes than there is, just preaching about what you do best. There's so much value in learning from your mistakes and being able to, again, walk people all the way through the other side of that equation. So again, don't let perfectionism hold you back, and don't think that just because you're not perfect or just because you've made mistakes doesn't mean that you can't provide value to other people.
I love that so much. I am a recovered perfectionist myself,
Yeah.
and that is something I'm always saying, and I love that you're echoing it here. Fight that perfectionism. It comes for us as teachers across the board. So really an important thing to hear. This has been such a fun conversation. I love how different it is than the usual content that I bring to my listeners. And I would love to just end by you telling us what you're working on right now, what you're excited about, and also tell us where we can find you online.
Yeah, absolutely. So something that I am most passionate about is, again, helping people who are stuck in a day job, whatever that may look like, whether it's teaching or something else. I really am, what lights me up is helping them bring their dream business to fruition. And as I alluded to earlier in this episode, especially in the brick and mortar world, funding is one of the biggest obstacles that you have to overcome. So I just created a brand new, updated for 2024 funding class. Again, I will share the link with you, but it is all about projecting revenue, estimating startup costs, figuring out how to get that funding, all that good stuff. We cover it all. It's a 2-hour class. It's probably the most in-depth I get in a free class. But again, if funding isn't top of mind, or if you're just interested in learning more about the industry or the owners who are out there doing it right now, I am Play Cafe Academy on YouTube. And I also have a podcast called the Profitable Play Podcast. Now, my podcast is more geared towards current owners. I will say it's more geared towards optimizing and scaling your indoor playground business. So if you're just looking to dip your toe in the water and learn about launching and what it takes and things like that, YouTube is the best place to go.
Awesome. I'm so excited for us to come and follow you. We will definitely have the link to that free class in the show notes of this episode so listeners can find it there. And thank you so much, Michele, for sharing all of this with us.